I've read through it and going back through it again, and it's amazing the insights and the perception that he has of what's going on in our country today and how to address that. He is known for some impersonations, and I've asked him to do one this evening before he gets started. So it's my privilege to have Dr. Erwin Lutzer come and share with us this evening. Thank you, Dr. Lutzer.
So how in the world are you all doing tonight, huh? Everybody walking in the Spirit? Is it okay if I put this microphone down a little bit? I think I'm wired. A little Sunday school pupil said my teacher is a quarterly wired for sound, so I'm wired for sound. Well, it's just great to be with you, and your pastor heard that I grew up on a farm about 5 miles from a town of 75 people, a place in Canada, film by evangelist Billy Graham called Mr. Texas. Now, Mr. Texas, you didn't see it. It's in black and white, and it's hard to get a hold of, but it's Billy's first film, really. And I came home hooked on Billy Graham. Now, my generation of teenagers was into Elvis, and I was into Billy. And I don't want to argue about it, but I think I made the better choice, actually. So tonight, I know I should be wearing a sports coat. I wasn't planning to do this, but your pastor asked me to, and so I'm not dressed so much for the occasion, but and I haven't done this for a while because Billy's no longer with us here. He's in heaven, but we'll see how it comes out, all right? So Billy is preaching in, is this Lafayette? Yes. I don't think he's ever preached here, has he? We'll say that he's in Indianapolis. That's probably where he would go. And then we'll try it from there. The problems and the perplexities that we face as a nation seem to be almost overwhelming. Recently, one of our leaders, speaking to a group of students at Johns Hopkins University, said that we may well be living in the most confusing, bewildering, and perplexing hour of history. All of our leaders agree that the world seems to be plunging headlong toward disaster. However, this evening it is our privilege to be here in Lafayette. As I've traveled around the world, I've met scores of young people from this church founded so many years ago. At a moment, I'm going to ask you to come, hundreds of you. You simply get up out of your seats and I want you to come. And for the many of you who have joined us tonight by television, we'd like to send you some literature. We'd like to send you a book that has been a blessing to tens of thousands of people around the world, written by Pastor Lutzer. Just write to me, Billy Graham, Minneapolis, Minnesota. That's all the address you need, just Billy Graham, Minneapolis, Minnesota. Now until this same time next week, goodbye, and may the Lord bless you real good. So anyway, that's Billy. Humility aside for just a moment, sometimes humility does get in the way of truth, but if I might be humble. By the way, your pastor has a great sermon on humility, he told me. The problem is, he said, I haven't found a crowd big enough to preach it to. That's what he said. But if you were to read my autobiography, as God might want you to, it's entitled, He Will Be the Preacher. Because when I was a baby sleeping in a crib, the pastor and his wife came over to my parents and said, and the pastor's wife saw me there in the crib and said in German, he will be the preacher. Now, I don't know, she may have made this as an offhand remark, and she never said it about my other two brothers, but at any rate, it turned out to be right. My whole life has been a story of God's providence And as I was telling your pastor, there's no connection between the privileges I've had and my background except the grace of God and the prayers of my parents. Now tonight I'm actually going to sit down because most of you are, and this young man over here, if he has the energy, he can see if he can help me. Now he's a young man, and so I think he can. And the reason for this, I know that it seems a little odd, but I'm going to be here a while. So you might as well get used to it. Can you push me a little closer here? You know, draw me nearer. There you are. That's good. You know, you have to. I looked in the mirror the other day and I said to my wife, I said, honey, I don't look 79, do I? She said, no, you don't, but you used to. You know, I'll tell you, if you guys kept laughing like that, I could go on all night doing that. But I don't think that's why I'm here. We will not be silenced, standing courageously against our culture's assault on Christianity. How did we get here? In order for us to understand how we got here, we must understand, first of all, cultural Marxism. Cultural Marxism is distinguished from classical Marxism. Classical Marxism had to do only primarily with economics, and it brought about the revolutions in Russia and China. Cultural Marxism says we can achieve the same goals without a revolution like that, as long as we capture the arts, entertainment, education. If we vote for the right people, we can bring about a Marxist state and do it incrementally. And then people will like it when they see it because they will see its advantages. Now, one of the things that Marx taught was that the family is a unit of oppression that had to be destroyed. The reason is because you can't understand Marxism unless you realize that it is really based on the idea that there are the oppressed and then there are the oppressors. And everybody is divided into one category or another. You're either oppressed or you're an oppressor. And Marx saw that the family was a unit of oppression that was standing in the way of the glories of the Marxist state. Why? Because wives were oppressed by their husbands. Parents oppressed their children. They took them to church, and God was the ultimate oppressor. And so the family had to be destroyed. That's why when you think of Black Lives Matter, do Black Lives matter? Absolutely, they matter. All Black Lives matter. But the organization that uses that mantra says on its website, among other things, we believe in the dissolution of the nuclear family because they have admitted it is a Marxist organization. So what you must see is that the family is going to be under attack, absolutely. Now, what we need to do is to understand how this Marxism, cultural Marxism, is applied to various segments of our society. And once you understand the underlying philosophy, everything begins to make sense. It has a unity to what is happening before us every single day. Let's begin, for example, by the way, George Orwell, whom I quote quite a bit in the book. I mean, his ability to understand totalitarianism and so forth is fantastic. He basically described what we're seeing here. He says that he played a very cruel trick on a wasp. He was eating, and the wasp came and sat on his plate and began to eat his jam. So he took his knife and cut the wasp in half. And the wasp kept eating jam, by the way. He said, only when the wasp began to fly did it understand the seriousness of its condition. And you know, when you look at America today, I have to say that the condition is much more serious than you and I think it is. sitting here in middle America with all these freedoms and all these opportunities, things are probably a lot worse. I know they are a lot worse than you and I know about, and only when we want to fly will we fully understand. Now let's take this idea of Marxism and let's apply it to our culture. First of all, what you have to do is to rewrite the past in order to build a new future. This explains why it is that our Judeo-Christian heritage is under attack. Because if you want to build it on a humanistic Marxist foundation, you have to vilify the past first. Communism has always done that. When Mao Zedong came to China, you know that he began to rewrite, rename streets, rename cities. Some of us are old enough to remember when St. Petersburg, Russia was Leningrad, and then it was Stalingrad. In other words, each person, each epoch, wants to rewrite and trash the past so that it can build to the future. So in China and Russia, monuments were destroyed and so forth because a new future, a new kind of communism had to be brought about. Now, when you think of the way in which our history is being trashed today, one of the reasons I wrote this book also, though it wasn't the primary reason, is that when parents send their kids to university, why is it that when they come back hating America? You have to understand what they are being taught. Now, racism is used as an excuse to trash our Judeo-Christian history, and I can understand that Confederate monuments are offensive to our black brothers and sisters. As a matter of fact, it might be okay if some of them are torn down. The Confederate flag that was taken down in Mississippi, I think that was a very good thing. But the point is this, that it's not only that, it's the founding fathers, because they were not perfect. Many of them apparently had slaves. And so the whole history has to be vilified. Now, slavery is terrible. And the consequences of slavery and all those things, if you read those stories, it's enough to make a stone weep. But is that legitimately the reason enough to trash our history and think we can rebuild it on a humanistic foundation? Arthur Schlesinger, who was a confidant of President Kennedy, said that history is to a nation what memory is to a person. So if a person loses his memory, he becomes whatever people say he is, because he really doesn't know who he is. So they want us to lose our collective memories of who we are and to so trash the past that they see no value in America. We are just one great racist nation, and our history needs to be vilified. Now, the point to be made here is this begins to explain a lot of things. It even begins to explain immigration and all, where you have, an influx of people at the border to balance out white supremacy and all the things that you hear about today. Now, the church is going to have to, and each time, by the way, I mention another challenge, I always want to refer to the church, because after all, that's where my heart is. I think as a church, we're going to have to rethink what it is like to live in a regime that is no longer, what shall we say, favorable to the Christian worldview. Up until now in America, all presidents were somewhat deferential to Christian values, to freedom of speech. All that is being washed away. And so we must understand that we're going to have to relearn that even though the American Constitution is a remarkable document, and by the way, I was born in Canada, but I became a naturalized American citizen many years ago. The Constitution is a remarkable document, but ultimately, the church was not even built on the Constitution, it was built upon Jesus Christ. And when Jesus stood there and said, "Upon this rock I will build my church," he actually was standing in Caesarea Philippi, which was the citadel of pagan religion. So we're going to have to relearn that we can no longer depend upon our government for our freedoms. I'll comment more on that. But that we're going to have to relearn that the church is built on Jesus Christ and not the wonderful supports that we have had because of our history, because our history is being trashed and vilified. Let me go on to another way that this is applied, and that is to race. Use diversity to divide and destroy. Many of you will know that in Chicago there was a community organizer by the name of Saul Alinsky. Saul Alinsky died in 1976, but through the providence of God, I talked with and spent quite a bit of time with one of his associates. And this associate told me that Saul Alinsky was not interested in solving problems. He said, don't solve problems, use them. This man said they had wonderful ideas as to how they could help the under-resourced communities of Chicago. And Saul Alinsky was opposed to it because what he said was this, and he called himself a Marxist. He saw that racial tension could be used to bring about a Marxist revolution. So rather than solving problems, you do all that you possibly can to fuel those problems, because remember, the goal is that the oppressed have to overcome the oppressors. And that's what is being taught in universities today, is the critical race theory. Critical race theory says that you are either an oppressor or you are among the oppressed. And therefore, what we need to do is to empower. When you think of critical race theory, think primarily of socialism and so forth, and the grasping of power and resources. What has to happen is the oppressed have to overcome the oppressor and gain cultural dominance. That's why all these diversity studies in our universities are intended not to bring about reconciliation, but rather to keep the races in perpetual conflict, accusation, shouting at one another across racial fences. That is intentional. Remember, all of this is being fueled. It's being fueled by what is being taught in our universities and what we see on the news virtually every day. Now, I could say more about that, but I want to talk about the church and Christianity here for a moment. Christianity has an answer for this that the world does not have. Christianity says, you know, the differences between us are not that great. We are all sinners. We all come to the foot of the cross and we receive God's forgiveness. And when we meet together for the Lord's Supper, there are no black spaces and white spaces and brown spaces. We are one in Christ, and then having received God's forgiveness and God's reconciliation, we ask, what can we do together to make things better? In other words, we have this idea that we can work together to make things better. We don't have to keep shouting at one another with all kinds of accusations. We don't need to keep inflaming all the rhetoric and the anger. Let's come together in Christ. And there are ministries in the city of Chicago that prove that there are things that we can do together that are helpful and that help remedy situations. But it's not, but we should not divide it up and say, now this group has all of the vices and this group has all of the virtues. But Christianity says we don't really have a skin problem, we do have a sin problem. And when you talk about racism, it goes into every human heart. You know, Solzhenitsyn said the line between good and evil is not between races and colors and countries. It runs through every human heart. So what we need to do is to humble ourselves, listen to each other, but preach a sense of reconciliation. You know, at Moody Church, on any given Sunday before COVID, there were 70 different countries of origin represented, because heaven is going to be filled with people from every tongue and nation and so forth. And we wanted to represent that, but we can't do it as long as we are shouting at each other and blaming and shaming and so forth. We meet at the foot of the cross and we say, let's deal with our issues and then ask the question, how do we move forward together? All right, so I gave you a brief thing on diversity, to divide and to destroy. The reason, by the way, that there's a very difficult solutions here. In this book that God wants all of you to have and to read, I quote a doctor by the name of Theodore Dalrymple. He's not a Christian, but he's a doctor. And he wrote a book about a permanent underclass. That isn't exactly the title. I think that's the subtitle. But what he said is this. He said that in his practice over many years, he has noticed that where there is the dissolution of the family, where you have no father in the home, and 70% of the births are out of wedlock, he says, I can guarantee you that there will be drugs, and there will be crime, and there will be antagonism, and there will be a breakdown, and in effect, all the money we can possibly pour into a situation like that is not going to help. So it's not the responsibility of one group only, and of course, the same thing happens in white communities. I'm not being at all pointing my finger here, except to say that as the family breaks down, we'll come across social problems that cannot be remedied simply by what is sometimes called social justice. By the way, in this chapter that I'm discussing, I distinguish between biblical justice and social justice. They are not the same thing. Social justice has to do with sexual radicalism. It has to do with equality, marriage equality, namely same-sex marriage. It has to do with environmental equality. It has to do with gender equality. It has to do with the Equality Act, which would be a terrible assault on our freedoms. And so we must understand what it is that we're up against and not be seduced by the term social justice, though it may be interpreted in some instances biblically. I can assure you that's not what your kids are being taught when they're in university. We must hurry on. Freedom of speech. Once again, once you understand cultural Marxism, it all makes sense. Marx believed that there should not be freedom of speech. Marcuse, who was a Marxist, who taught in Germany but also here in America, Marcuse argued this way. He said, if we have freedom of speech, the capitalists are going to win the argument. And they are the oppressors, and they will take advantage of freedom of speech to oppress others. And so the only way we can win the argument is to say there should be no freedom of speech for the capitalists, for the oppressors. Only the oppressed should speak. And today the oppressed are the LGBTQ community. They are the oppressed. Conservatives are the oppressors, and that's why they don't get invitations to speak at universities, and when they do, they oftentimes are being shouted down. And that's why 40% of millennials, I think, don't believe in freedom of speech, because if you have freedom of speech, the oppressors might win the argument. And so what you have to do is to make sure that there is no freedom of speech. And that, of course, is exactly what is happening today. I want to go to another chapter in my book that relates to this, and that is propaganda. The purpose of propaganda is to so shape people's view of reality that even when confronted with a mountain of evidence, they will not change their minds. And so what you do is you shape people's view of reality, and once it is shaped, there's no argumentation, there's no evidence that can ever be presented to change their minds. I'm going to take a little bit of water here. This actually, I'm sure, probably even comes from Indiana, probably. So let's talk about propaganda. Some of you know that I wrote a book about Hitler. In fact, there's a smaller one, 7 Lessons We Must Learn from Nazi Germany. The title of the book is When a Nation Forgets God. And there I have a chapter on propaganda, and I repeat some of it in this book. Hitler said that with the right use of propaganda, you can make heaven appear like hell and hell appear like heaven. How does propaganda work? First of all, it uses terminology and gives it an interesting twist. For example, when Hitler starved children, he called it putting them on a low-calorie diet. So what you do is we have them on a we don't starve kids, we just put them on a low-calorie diet. When he wanted to destroy the Jews, he called it the cleansing of the land. The land has to be cleansed, so we're just cleansing the land. So what you do is you camouflage what you are doing with language. You say, I believe in a woman's right to choose. Choose what? Choose pancakes over eggs for breakfast? Everybody knows what the politicians say, but they don't even have the nerve to finish the sentence. I've never heard a politician say, I believe in a mother's right to kill her preborn infant. You never hear that. You say, reproductive rights. In other words, you clothe everything as a right. You clothe everything with the word justice, reproductive justice, and you're actually camouflaging what you're doing. Now, in addition to that, you have collective demonization, and this is what is happening before our eyes. This was perfected in Russia. Collective demonization was this, that once the state demonized somebody, or deplatformed them in our terminology, everyone else chimed in because they wanted to show we're on your side. Collective demonization, which is what is happening today. When somebody is deplatformed on Twitter or whatever, everybody else chimes in because after all, you know, we're all in this together, and we want to show that we are woke enough. The question that they are asking him, am I woke enough to be seen as virtuous? So in order to make myself virtuous, I want to target those who aren't virtuous, to find something that they said 15 years ago and vilify them for it. And also I want to show my loyalty to the cultural stream that we are in. In order for you to understand that, you must realize that in Nazi Germany, there were churches that put up swastikas, hung them on their door, saying, in effect, that when you come for the Christians, don't come for us because we are on your side. That's collective demonization, where everyone collectively has to chime in and demonize the person who deserves to be demonized because we are righteous and he is unrighteous. So that's what you have happening today. And when it comes to freedom of speech that I mentioned a moment ago, well, you know what is happening on various platforms. I don't have to tell you about that, especially if you're a young person, you understand this much better. And, you know, the book, When Harry Became Sally, is actually a scholarly book on transgenderism. And it's really, I read the book, it's very scholarly, it's based on medicine, but it's banned. Why? The new term is harm reduction. So we don't want to cause harm. This is deeper philosophically than you really realize, because what it is saying is that now psychological harm becomes the basis of what you can say and what you can't say. So truth is not the important thing. It is whether or not you are causing psychological harm that will determine whether you have freedom of speech or not. So that's the way in which you know, propaganda works. And you have gaslighting. Some of you know about that. And what gaslighting is to so shape people's view of reality that they begin to think that they are crazy. And you know, this business of pronouns. In fact, a certain website called Amazon, I wasn't going to give you the name, but I will. I noticed under my biography, because Amazon still carries all of my books, for which I'm grateful, but I noticed that it says, you know, read this to read about Erwin Lutzer's and see their journey. Instead of his journey, is their journey. Excuse me, I shouldn't laugh. But why all that confusion? Can you memorize all the things that you're supposed to remember? You know, that you actually hear, your name is Bert because you were born biologically a boy, but you want to be called Bertha. And I should use the plural instead of she. You know, there's a company now that has on its website, don't use mother and father and so forth, and, you know, God bless everybody, amen, and a woman. Are we going to also have, when we go to a restaurant, a menu and a woman-you? I mean, is that what it's coming down to? Now, there's a method in all of this absurdity. And the method is this, to so intimidate you, because you don't know what's appropriate to say or what's not appropriate to say, that you will keep your mouth shut. Because you're scared to speak. You might use the wrong pronoun and be called out as racist. I quote Churchill a couple of times in this book, but regarding propaganda, he said this: the desire to believe something is much stronger than rational argument. That's why some of you are having such a hard time to convince your friends that you're right. Oh, excuse me, that was funny too, but you missed it. The fact is, often you're in an argument where there is no rationality because the desire to believe something is much stronger. And this, by the way, leads to liberal theology too, where there are teachers that teach according to people's passions. The desire to believe something oftentimes is the basis for all kinds of theology today. Well, we have to hurry on because you have to get home so that you can go to church in the morning. The next thing is the sexualization of children. By the way, regarding the church needs to speak plainly in terms of all that is going on in terms of propaganda. But that, I think, is evident in Calvary churches, where you have a lot of pastors, I'm sure all of them, who speak very plainly in a world that has gone crazy. The sexualization of children. I begin that chapter by pointing out that the cell phone in your children's hands will do more to inform his or her worldview than an hour of church and an hour of Sunday school. We have to fight this battle on multiple fronts, but the point to be made is this, that in the state of Illinois, a curriculum was adopted a couple of years ago that is basically teaching transgenderism and all these things to grade school students, maybe fourth grade, and then you probably saw a woman reading an ABC book to a little child who's maybe 18 months old that already has, gender issues of transgenderism and so forth. This is nothing less than demonic. This comes from the pit of hell. But remember, the purpose is to destroy your children's sexuality. And there's a reason for this, because confused children are more easily led than those that have parents and who teach them the right way. And so what we must do is to recognize that we're living in an era where this whole trans thing is destroying the culture and so forth. So here's a girl, for example, true story, a teenager who says, "I'm a cat." Okay. Now, this is a very interesting analysis, because according to transgenderism, you are whatever you say you are because only you really know who you are. Okay, so she says she's a cat. All right, I guess she's a cat. Now, here's the point. You say, "Pastor Lutzer, this is getting absurd." It is absurd, but you must remember that we're in an era when absurdity no longer is an argument against anything. Common sense is no longer an argument against anything. And what you must do is to recognize that I can't get into that. I have to stay on track here. But you must understand that all of this business, we must listen to people's experiences. That might seem innocuous. Of course we want to hear your experiences. But hidden behind that is a tremendous a tremendous lie. You must understand the standpoint theory of truth says this, that the truth that you believe must be held as sacred because it's true to you. So there are seminaries today that teach that that whites, for example, cannot really understand the Bible because they are bringing their oppression to the text, and we must listen to the oppressed. Now, of course, we can gain all kinds of insights, and you could make a good case for the fact that we must listen to the various viewpoints, but I want to make myself clear here. That's why, you know, when it comes to interpreting the Constitution, they say, well, we need someone of this race or this color or this. What difference does that make? Why not get the best people who can understand the text? But today, the whole idea of equity says that you can't expect these people to get the right text and the right interpretation because we must listen to those who have this experience. Boy, I hope I'm making myself clear here. Are you all with me here? You know, I don't want to be like a politician in Chicago who left a political rally the other day and whispered to one of his friends, I hope that in the excitement I didn't happen to make myself clear about anything. The standpoint theory of truth says your experience has to be validated as truth. So let's not argue. She says she's a cat, only she knows who she really is. She's a cat. By the way, here in Chicago, a man says, okay, a teacher writes to me, here's a boy who was born a boy, he's Bert. In school, he wants to be called Bertha because he's a girl. And the principal says, when the parents come for a parent-teacher consultation, don't you dare tell them that their son is a girl in school. Now, do you see the insanity as to where this is going? But remember, the goal is insanity, because then people will keep their mouths shut and be so intimidated by absurdities that they will no longer speak. Well, did you know that, of course, drag queens and all, we could go into that. The idea is to normalize the bizarre. Do you know what a throuple is? A throuple is 3 people living together, maybe 2 women and a man, or a man and 2 women. And that's apparently now quite common in evangelical churches, throuple. Arguments are being made for pedophilia. Why? Because, like somebody said, once you no longer have God in your life, you can say no to nothing. There's no stopping point when you don't have God in your life. Parents, God is going to hold you accountable for the way in which your children were educated. And if you can't pull them out of the public school, you may have a pretty good public school, actually, here in Middle America. I understand that. It's not like some of the cities. But what we must do is to recognize that if they are going to a public school, every day you need to meet with them. You need to go over what they are being taught. You need them to help them sift through all of the garbage if they are being taught that. You need that because God is going to hold you accountable for your kids. And Hitler was absolutely right when he said that he who controls the youth controls the future. Well, let me get now to one of my favorite topics, and that is capitalism is the disease, socialism is the cure. Just have socialism. Socialism means that you don't own your money, the government does. And the government gets to distribute it with equity. And what could be more sensible than Wall Street pay? Free college, free health care, free this, a guaranteed minimum wage so that no matter whether you work or not, you still get paid. I mean, what's there not to like? But have you ever noticed that socialists always talk about how to divide the wealth? They never talk about how to create wealth because guess what? Socialism cannot create wealth. Wealth can only be created when there is enough creativity and adventurism to begin new businesses, to reach out. And in socialism, once you're in this caste system, you basically have to stay there. My wife and I were in Russia in the mid-'80s, before the wall fell, and we discovered that doctors in hospital were not being paid much more than the other help that was in the hospital. Because after all, we need income equality. Is it any wonder that they had a great shortage of doctors? And what they had was income equality. You cannot have the state dole out wages and control the economy and how much people will be paid. You can't have that and freedom. It has to stifle freedom. It has to. And what I'm going to say is this, that I know that all kinds of predictions have been made about our economy, so I don't want to get into that too deeply, but inflation is on the way because you can't pump that much money. Remember when the feds made the money, you know how they made it. You're acquainted with the phrase ex nihilo, out of nothing. What they do is they move decimal points on their computer. That's true, and suddenly there's all this money and everybody is enjoying all of these benefits. Now, here's the point. Socialism is attractive in some sense, but of necessity, it cannot work if you want to have a prosperous country. It can't work because it keeps choking itself. And people say, well, capitalism is corrupt. Yes, of course capitalism is corrupt. There's a lot of corruption in capitalism, but it's nothing in comparison to the corruption in socialism. Because socialism, once you have the intelligentsia doling out the money, you then have total control, and cheating and all that becomes endemic. I don't think I've used that word before, but I think it fits here. There was a kibbutz in Israel that wanted to be run on socialist principles. Everybody gets paid the same, free lights, free food. And what happened is you had all of these people come. It was very attractive. The lazy people loved it. And they brought their dogs to the dining room because, after all the food is free. They kept the lights on after they left rooms because I'm not paying for the electricity. And they had to give it up because, follow carefully, they discovered that it was a paradise for parasites. And that's the way it is. You know, Churchill said this: the great vice of capitalism is the unequal distribution of blessings. But the great virtue of socialism is the equal distribution of misery. Misery is equally distributed. Now, we can argue about various things, but that's the bottom line, and I have to hurry on, so I'm going to give you one more line, and then I'm going to go to the next thing. And that is this, that have you ever noticed why? Have you ever asked yourself, why do mice die in mouse traps? Well, it's because they don't understand why the cheese is free. Do I have an amen back there? The next thing is, join with radical Islam to destroy America. Islam, radical Islam, has a very different philosophy than liberalism and cultural Marxism. They go in two different directions, but for now they are allies because they are like a battering ram against Christianity and capitalism. And in war it says, the enemy of my enemy is my friend. So Islam is being taught in some schools. I list this in the book, and parents have objected, and you're intolerant, you're just a bigot, you don't want your child taught Islam in schools. Where in the world is the ACLU? Could you imagine Christianity being taught in a school? Your tax dollars, which are so liberally spent on things that you don't necessarily agree with, are actually being used to build prayer rooms in schools for Muslim students. You could not get them to build a prayer room for Christians without all you know coming apart. So, the point to be made is that for now, the left is willing to go along with radical Islam, and I'm not accusing all Islamists or all Muslims of being radical, but the radicals oftentimes have a disproportionate amount of influence, as you well know, and that's where we are going. And while I'm on the subject, and I hope I'm not stepping on any toes here, there are some churches that have interfaith dialogue with Muslims. I don't mind a debate necessarily, but interfaith dialogue allows the Muslim to stand up and say whatever he wants about Islam, then you stand up and say whatever you want about Christianity. But the problem is that what the Muslim is saying may not be true. As a matter of fact, I quote a book written by Islamists for Islamists on how to make Islam palatable to Americans and how to answer objections and so forth, and talks about that Muhammad was great when it came to equal rights for all races and so forth. Now, all that you need to do is study a little bit of history and know that that's just a little bit off the target. But the point is that that's a separate story, but Americans are so trusting and so believing and so want to make sure that everyone is as loving as they are, that sometimes we can be somewhat naive. The next chapter is vilify, vilify, vilify. Everybody's vilifying everybody else. No rational argument, just vilify them. Coming to a church near you. There's a church in Missouri that I know very, very well because I know someone who's on the staff very, very well. In October, actually it was only a year ago, this past October, so this coming October it'll be 2 years. The pastor preached a message on Genesis chapter 1, verse 27, where God created them male and female. Now, the sermon was so loving. He was so differential to those who struggle with their identity, because there are those that do, you know. Some of you maybe have had kids who've come to you and said, you know, I was born a boy, but I think I'm a girl. And the pastor was very sensitive about that and very loving. In fact, I wondered whether or not he was going to land the plane. But he did at the end. There are only two genders. By evening, they were vilified on the news. They were on the front page of the newspaper and being vilified. And students at the university said, we don't know if we feel safe in a town that has a church like this. Now, you must understand the doctrine of safism. Safism has arisen where if anyone hears anything that they disagree with or anything that they are offended by, these students have to go into a safe place where they can lick the wounds of their unappreciated victimhood. And so they needed a safe place, because they couldn't handle the fact that somebody was preaching that. That's what it's coming to, folks, and it's going to get worse. The question is, will we stand? And now, I'm going to bring the plane down because I already heard somebody back there reminding me that I have to do this. The final chapter of the book is entitled, Strengthen What Remains. It's the words of Jesus to the church at Sardis. He says, you know, you have a reputation of being alive, but actually you're dead, Jesus said, which is very interesting. Imagine that, you know, Jesus comes along, church consultants say that the church is alive, but Jesus comes along and says, I can't find a heartbeat. But Jesus says, strengthen what remains. Now, in 2009, Rebecca and I were in Turkey. We were with a tour group, and we visited the 7 churches of Asia Minor. And something very interesting in Sardis. Here are pagan temples, and right next to the pagan temples, even up against them, is a church. Now, it's not a first century church, so I don't want to read too much into this. It was maybe second or third century. But the question is, how do you interpret that? Here's a pagan temple where all kinds of immorality is happening, and there's a church up against it. There are two ways you can interpret that. One is to say this: the church said, here is the darkest, most pagan part of town, and we want to be right there as a witness, light in this darkness. That's one possibility. But the other possibility that is more like it, more likely, is we feel comfortable next to the pagan temple because we've accepted the values of the pagan temple. So maybe somebody could worship in church, take 10 steps, and be in a pagan temple and not see any huge contradiction there. So what I do in that chapter is I write what I think Jesus might say to the church in America today. And I realize with hesitancy I don't claim to know the mind of Jesus exactly. But I think that Jesus would say to the American church a couple of things. First, preach the gospel and help people to distinguish between it and what is being taught as social justice, which oftentimes has eclipsed the gospel, even in evangelical churches. There is a thing like biblical justice, absolutely, preach it. But social justice, the way it's usually defined, is Marxist, as I mentioned. Jesus would then say, you have accepted the sexuality of your culture. There are people who affirm same-sex relationships on the basis of love. Fact is that love can be evil. Not everything that is loving is right. When Adam and Eve sinned in the garden, they didn't stop loving. They just started to love the wrong things. They became lovers of pleasure, lovers of self, lovers of money. And so just because, people say, well, what's wrong with two men who love each other being married? Well, there's love that is evil. And if that is relational love, sexual love, it can go under that banner, but that is not biblical love. And so what you find today is churches submitting to the culture under the banner of love. And what we need to do is to stand against that and say, look, we might be vilified, but here we stand. We cannot do any other. And what comes to mind is Luther, who, by the way, I wrote a book on the Reformation entitled Recovering the Gospel. The name actually is slipping me, and that is unusual. But Rescuing the Gospel, that's the name of it. But the point is that here I stand. Oh, you should just read the prayer that Luther prayed before he made that declaration. Every time you read it, it'll just give you chills. Oh, Luther had no sense of God's presence. He cried out to God and said, God, when I'm laid on the rack, because he expected to be put to death and was supposed to be. He wasn't for some interesting reasons, but he says, when I'm laid out on the rack and my body is torn, are you going to be there for me, oh God? God, are you going to be there for me when I'm going through that kind of a death? And he's pouring out his heart to God. And yet, the next day, he made the famous declaration, which actually becomes one of the most pivotal points in all of church history. When he's asked whether or not he will recant, he finally says, I cannot and I will not recant. To go against conscience is neither right nor safe. I cannot and I will not recant. Hier stehe ich kann nicht anderes. Here I stand. I cannot do otherwise. Now, the Emperor Louis signed a declaration that he was to be put to death, but because he was told he'd have safe contact conduct to Wittenberg. He wasn't put to death, and then he hid in the Wartburg Castle, where he translated the New Testament. But here's the point, is that there comes a time when we as Christians are going to have to say, we will not recant, and we are going to take the consequences. Because I say to you today, we're in a culture where there is no place to hide. There's no place to hide. They're coming for you, and I'm not trying to be dramatic, but I could give examples of how they are coming for us in various things. There are now applications for businesses where you have to give your religion, because if you're a white Protestant, that means that you have, you're a person of privilege, and so maybe you won't be accepted. I mean, there are just a dozen different ways that we can no longer hide, and we're going to have to learn to declare ourselves and to take the consequences, whatever those consequences are. And then I talk about how Jesus would talk to us about technology. Technology is instantly addictive. So you and I, with our cell phones, with our television, with this and this and this, and the teenagers, there could be some teenagers here tonight who are on their cell phones while I'm talking. It happens in church today, where we're constantly distracted. How are we going to overcome that? What would Jesus say? Because no other era has ever had to face what we have to face today. No other era has ever had technology the way we have it now. So Jesus would say, love not the world, neither the things that are in the world, for all that is in the world, the lust of the flesh, the lust of the eyes, and so forth. And Jesus would ask us to share the gospel of Jesus Christ and take the consequences. We're going to have to rethink what other generations have had to go through in terms of their persecution because of their faithfulness to Christ. I want to end tonight with Martin Niemöller. By the way, there's nothing going on in Lafayette tonight. I have to tell you this, okay? If it's past your bedtime, you can leave, but I'll point you out if you go out the door. Hitler meets with the pastors, okay, and he chews them out, because the church was not bending to him as quickly as he wanted to. And he says, you preach the pure gospel, but don't you talk about the Reich. Don't criticize the Reich. It was known as the Muzzle Decree. When Hitler was finished, Niemöller, choosing his words carefully, shook hands with him and said, you said that you would take care of the German people. We were to take care of the church. But God has given us a larger responsibility for the German people, too. Hitler turned away without a word, and that night Niemöller's office was ransacked, and a lot of people that sided with him turned against him because he shouldn't have confronted Hitler directly and all those other interesting things. But the story I want to tell you is, here's Niemöller now. He's going to be tried for abuse of pulpit. Abuse of pulpit, we would call it hate speech today. So he's sitting in a cell, and a young German guard comes to get him to go to trial. And as they're walking through this, I want to call it a subway. It's actually a thing underground that you walk through. What is that? Yeah, whatever you guys said, yeah. You know, you're walking through a hallway, but it's underground. Tunnel is the good word. And they're walking through this tunnel on the way to the courtroom, and Niemöller begins to hear voices, a voice. The name of the Lord is a strong tower, and whoever runs into it is safe. And then Niemöller realized that it was the young guard who was quoting that verse to him. And Niemöller said, that young guard will never know what he meant to me. He said, I never saw him again except at a distance. But he said, what a blessing that verse was. It's from the book of Proverbs, as you know. I've often thought to myself about that young soldier, obviously brought up in church. When the Nazis were put to death in Nuremberg, a book has been written about that. by a Lutheran, a conservative Lutheran pastor who was their chaplain. He said that when he had services for them, I think there were 6 Catholics and about 15 Protestants. He said they were able to quote the Lord's Prayer. We quoted it together. What went wrong between their training and their upbringing and ending the way in which they ended? What's the slippage there? I think that it's something that you and I need to be able to talk about and ask, is the next generation that we are raising going to have the strength to stand against these cultural streams that are so powerful? But anyway, back to Niemöller. He's giving kind of his final speech to his church before he goes to prison, and he went to a concentration camp, as you know. We have all of us, the whole church and the whole community, have been thrown into the tempter's sieve, and he is shaking and the wind is blowing, and it now must become manifest whether we are wheat or chaff. We must see that the day of calm, meditative Christianity has come to an end. It is now springtime for the hopeful and expectant Christian church. It is testing time. God is giving Satan a free hand so that he may shake us up, so that it may be seen what manner of men we are. Satan swings his sieve, and Christianity is thrown hither and thither. And he who is not ready to suffer, he who calls himself a Christian only because he thinks thereby he can gain something, he is blown away like the chaff is blown away by the wind. My heart is heavy tonight for the Christian church. It's heavy for America. This afternoon I was spending some time resting and thinking about this message, and a heaviness came over my spirit. That this nation that has been so used of God to get the gospel of Jesus Christ around the world, go anywhere in the world, most of the ministries that are preaching the gospel are all funded by American funds. Americans give $400 billion a year to charity. To think that all of that might disappear, but the question is, will we be faithful? And I ask that to the younger generation because some of us are old enough to know that we are over many of our battles, and you know, especially when you're 79 or whatever. But that's the question. A school teacher in Chicago said he was told it is not enough if you simply are tolerant of same-sex marriage. He said if you don't celebrate it, you could lose your job. Okay, now there's a line in the sand. Can a Christian celebrate what God has condemned? No. So if he won't celebrate it and loses his job, will the church come around him and say, look, we're going to help you through this. We're going to help you find another job. We're going to help you pay your bills in the meantime. These are the kinds of issues that the church is going to have to face. We've not had to face them before, but they are now staring us in the face. I want to pray. Father, I pray that this lecture tonight may not be just stirring up concern, though that's fine, but that it would also stir within us a resolute spirit to face the issues and say, yes, we are willing to suffer for the cause of Christ and take the consequences and consider that a badge of honor. After all, Jesus said, blessed are you when men revile you and persecute you and say all manner of evil against you falsely for my sake. Great will be your reward in heaven, for so persecuted they the prophets who went before you. Grant us that kind of courage. May we not look around for a lighter cross, but bear the one that you've given us and take it joyfully into the world by our witness and by our hearts. In Jesus' name, amen.